Kellisue Kilcullen was born to parents Joyce and James in upstate New York. In 1999, she married Jason Ackernecht, and the two would soon have a little girl, Ashley. Kellisue was the breadwinner of the family and worked as a supervisor at a local Rite Aid store in Amsterdam, New York. She was also very active in her daughter's school, including cheerleading and the PTA. She was a busy woman. In September of 2008, Kellisue went to work as normal. She would leave work that night at 9:30 p.m., locking up the store and leaving at the same time as her fellow coworker. Kellisue got in her car and drove off. A few hours later, Kellisue's car was found just a few blocks from her house, on fire. But Kellisue was nowhere to be found. Where is Kellisue Ackernecht? If you are new here, our goal is to share the stories of the missing, the stories that need more attention and more exposure. I'd like to give a quick welcome to our newest Patreon member, Evie. Thank you so much for supporting us and our charity partners. This month, proceeds from Patreon and merch sales will go to Texas EquiSearch, a great search and rescue organization that helps missing person cases all over the U.S. Today's episode is also sponsored by Movement and Meals and Hydronique Hydration. Thank you for checking them out and supporting our sponsors as well. This story, the story of Kellisue Ackernecht from Amsterdam, New York, might sound familiar to you, especially if you have been a long-time listener. We actually covered Kellisue's story back in November of 2020. Not only did we cover Kellisue's case, it was actually our first ever episode. I wanted to cover her story again because we've learned a little bit more in this past year and a half since then, and it's a story that definitely deserves more attention. Let's do Kellisue's story justice here and now. Kellisue Ackernecht was born Kellisue Kilcullen in 1972. Not much is really known about her home life. She did have siblings, and there have been some online rumors, at least, that their childhood growing up wasn't easy. She would grow up in the Johnstown, New York area and would attend Fonda High School, where she graduated in 1992. In 1999, she met and married Jason Ackernecht. Shortly after they married, Kellisue gave birth to a baby girl they would name Ashley. They moved to Amsterdam, New York, a suburb about 10 miles from the Johnstown area where she grew up. And Kellisue was a very dedicated mom. She volunteered with the PTA and with the youth football and cheerleading organization that her daughter was a part of. She was well known within the school and especially with the other parents, and well liked. Kellisue was also a very hard worker, and in 2008, she was currently working as a supervisor at the local Rite Aid pharmacy in Amsterdam. Most people have said she was the breadwinner in the family, and she was always the breadwinner in the family, and that her husband Jason worked as a volunteer fireman. If he did have another job, it wasn't ever mentioned. But Jason being a volunteer firefighter is an interesting detail, and I want you to remember that for later on in the story. For Kellisue and Jason, things were tough. They were having some marital troubles, but the details of which are sketchy. And when questions are asked later on about that, about their marital troubles, we have some different answers, some different versions of the story. On September 30th, Kellisue went to work at Rite Aid. She had a closing shift that day, and at 9:30 p.m., Kellisue and a coworker locked up the store together. They said goodbye to each other in the parking lot, and they both drove off, likely each heading home for the night. At least that's what was believed. Meanwhile, a few hours later, back at home, Jason was woken up by his father. And he was woken up because the police were banging on the door. And apparently it woke up the father, but not Jason. When Jason went downstairs to talk to the police, they told him that they wanted him to come with them because they found his car, Kellisue's car, a few blocks away, and it was on fire. So Jason was confused at this point. Kellisue wasn't home. He knew she had the car. He didn't know what was going on. So he went with the officers to go check out the scene. And sure enough, there was his car, Kellisue's car, burnt. And it was burned beyond being able to recover anything from the car. But a quick search of the car itself and the entire area around the car turned up no Kellisue. They did determine that she was not in the vehicle. And the search for Kellisue was confusing. No one knew where to look. And of course, being that this happened in the middle of the night, no one saw anything. But a couple of neighbors did report saying that they thought they heard gunshots around midnight. In the days that followed, they did search the area around where the car was found. There was a nearby hiking trail, and someone found a pair of tan pants. And at first, it was thought that those were probably Kellisue's. That's what she wore to work at Rite Aid. But it was later revealed that they either couldn't tell if those were Kellisue's or they weren't hers. But I do find that weird. I mean, you find all sorts of things sometimes on a trail, but a pair of pants? So what did happen to Kellisue after she left Rite Aid? I also think it's important to note that there is no CCTV footage of Rite Aid in the parking lot that night, because that could certainly help answer some questions. So she left Rite Aid, but where did she go from there? Was her intent to go home, or was she going somewhere else first? Did she ever make it home? I do have an interesting clip to play of an interview that Jason did with a news reporter just last year. He had been very quiet with the media up until that point, so it's a very interesting interview. And I think it will show you a lot about who Jason Ackernecht is and a lot about his character. In April of last year, Jerry Gretzinger, a news reporter in New York, was doing a segment on cold cases in the area. And one of the cases he was looking to feature was the case of Kellisue, and he was able to do a phone interview with Jason Ackernecht. I think this definitely gives some insight into the mind of Jason Ackernecht, at least from his point of view about what happened September 30th, 2008.
Glad we're able to connect. I appreciate the time.
Not a problem, my friend. Yes.
And, I'd spoken with the chief. I've done several interviews on the past, and certainly you're somebody who I wanted to speak to. First of all, let me just ask you, going back to that time, I know right after it was a difficult time for you because, as often is the case, the spouse of someone who goes missing, everybody looks right at the husband or the wife and assumes that they must have had something to do with it. Talk to me about that experience.
Well, what happened was I was sound asleep with my daughter, and my parents had to wake me up because the cops come knocking on the door early in the morning.
Yep.
And my stepfather come and woke me up and says, "Is Kellisue here?" I says, "No," because I haven't seen her. And I go, "What? What's going on?" They go, "Cops are here. They want to see you." So So I get up, get dressed, go downstairs, and they says, your car's on fire down at Rock Hollow. I go, excuse me? So I go with them, and I do what they asked me to do, and we go down there, and yep, that was my car. It was burnt to a crisp. And when my daughter at that time, she wasn't even 7 years old. And what do you tell a 7-year-old? I had to lie to her that day because she had to go to school. And when she come home, sat down, told her that her mother didn't come home from work and we don't know where she is. And they investigated me, and I didn't have a thing to do with it. I was in the clear because I was sound asleep that night. And Dave Gilbo and I were in contact for days on end. And then I had to go get her paycheck. And I noticed something strange, but I didn't put two and two together until years later that half her clothes were down at work.
You said she had clothes at work?
Yeah.
So, a couple interesting things I want to point out before I finish playing the clip for you. The long pauses make me feel like he's not confident in what he's saying, and I found that interesting. Also, he was incorrect with his own daughter's age. He said she was 7. She was actually 8, and she was almost 9. She was a couple weeks away from her 9th birthday. And it also seems like he deflects questions quite a bit here, and maybe that's more prevalent in the next couple questions coming up, but he never really answers the questions directly. Let's continue.
What would be the explanation for that?
She was cheating on me with a coworker.
And do you think that had something to do with her disappearance then? Or
Yes.
so the chief, he kind of, when we were chatting, he said, I actually just heard something new from Jason, and he alluded to something about a coworker, that there might have been a plan that he hadn't heard about before. He said, so is this the same thing?
Yes.
So what's the story there? I mean, is there more to it that you're aware of, or?
I've just heard from different people. I don't know their names or what, but I've heard from different people that she had an affair with a guy that she worked with. And with half her clothes missing and like this, that's what put two and two together.
Okay, so my question about this is, the police chief told the news reporter that he just learned of this also from Jason or these other people. And Jason said he learned it from these other people, but he didn't know their names. And if Kellisue was having an affair with someone at Rite Aid, a coworker, certainly we should be able to identify who that was. Rite Aid doesn't have that many employees. All police would need to do would be to find out who worked at Rite Aid and talk to them. Was there another Rite Aid worker that went missing at the same time? No one ever heard of anything like that. So that doesn't make sense to me at all. So I think it's interesting that that's Jason's story here, unless he just doesn't know what else could have happened. Maybe he's trying to reason with himself and figure out why Kellisue left him and Ashley and disappeared. Maybe he's just trying to make sense of this in his own head.
I'll have to ask Chief about that. I'm sure this is something that they could verify if there were clothes found or otherwise. And at the time when she disappeared, the amount of her clothes that were in the drawers. I mean, did you notice at the time that there was some missing, or?
Nope.
And police, I'm sure he's got records if they went through and thought to look at that or not. But let me, if you don't mind, and these are kind of the tough questions to ask, but as I said, and you lived it, immediately after this, people looked at you and they said, okay, what did Jason do? What did he have to do with this? So if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask you straight out to answer the questions people had, and just answer as you would. The first one, did you kill Kellisue Ackernecht?
I had nothing to do with it. Not at all.
And that was my next question. Did you have anything to do at all with her disappearance, or do you know what happened?
I have no clue.
So, I've had a couple of people said, I don't think he did it, but I think he knows. And you're saying you don't know anything about it.
Nope.
So here's something too. So how long were you guys married for?
Well,
Long enough to have an 8-year-old daughter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you knew her. I don't know exactly what your relationship was like. I know the chief said that there were other partners that were in and out of your lives over the years, but you had to know her pretty well. So with the knowledge you had of her, what's your gut telling you today? Is Kellisue alive and out there and decided to just disappear and start over? Or do you think something happened to her?
I think she just took off and started her life over again.
So you don't think there was any foul play? You think she just decided she needed a restart?
Yeah.
What? Let me ask you about your daughter. I spoke to her, and she was very well spoken about her emotions of that day. But she said there is no perfect answer for her, because either she finds out that mom was killed, or she finds out that mom up and left and never came back for her. And I know there's been some strain, some stress in your relationship between the two of you. But how as a father what message would you give to her to try to help her deal with whatever the outcome would be?
I talked to her a few times, and I told her that her mother and someone she worked with,
So that's part of so the other guy you talked about from Rite Aid, you're saying that Kellisue and that person took the night deposit and disappeared together?
Yeah.
Huh. Any idea who that person was? Because I'm assuming there would be another individual who would, has kind of disappeared.
I have no clue who he was.
So it's interesting there how he deflected that question and didn't really answer it regarding his daughter, and instead turned the conversation to this story about someone at Rite Aid. So I know it's a fairly long interview, but I think it's pretty insightful as to hearing Jason's point of view. I'm really curious to know what you all think after hearing this interview. I'm not sure that it leaves me any more confident that he did or didn't have anything to do with Kellisue's disappearance. And before we discuss Jason in a little more detail, I want to preface this by saying that police have never identified or named him as a suspect. Many friends of Kellisue's and many people that knew her through work and through the school said they had suspicions regarding Jason. Some people were aware of some marital problems the two were having, and others pointed out Jason's really strange behavior afterwards. For example, he was overheard at a school event saying something to the effect of, "I hope they don't find my wife. I have a girlfriend now." And another person said that she heard Jason say that he needed a new mom for his daughter. And all of this was overheard shortly after Kellisue disappeared. Weird, right? But that doesn't mean he was responsible for Kellisue's sudden disappearance. And in most missing person cases, the spouse's or partner is always a person of interest and always scrutinized closely. So let's go back and talk about the car fire for a second. Remember, I mentioned earlier that Jason was a volunteer fireman for the town. Is that a coincidence? Some have thought that he might have knowledge of fires that others don't. And isn't it odd that Kellisue's car was found on fire? Not to mention, there was talk that Jason was pretty friendly with the town's law enforcement personnel, including police and fire. And what I also find odd is that Johnstown Police Chief David Gilbo has said that they don't suspect arson as a cause of the fire because the car had been having radiator problems. I'm definitely no car expert, but that seems to be quite a coincidence. The car randomly burst into flames at 1:53 in the morning, and the person who was known to be driving the car goes missing. So let's say Kellisue had car trouble and broke down. Wouldn't she just get out and walk home? She was only a few blocks away. And if that did happen, maybe she did have car trouble and started walking. Maybe someone tried to pick her up instead. Maybe she was abducted. And then the car just burst into flames. I don't know. I mean, the police chief certainly knows more than I do, but that's some bad luck right there. According to her file, it was noted that they believed that an extramarital affair was the reason for Kellisue's disappearance. And Jason did mention in that interview that Kellisue was having an affair with someone she worked with. But I have to think that would be easily verifiable. But specifics of that have never really been discussed publicly. Certainly there's a record of employees at Rite. So it does appear that one of the main theories of Kellisue's disappearance is that she ran off with someone to start a new life somewhere. The problem with that, according to her family, is that she was way too devoted to her daughter, Ashley. And while they don't doubt that she would have left Jason, they don't believe for a second that she would abandon her daughter, especially leaving her with Jason. Ashley Ackernecht was only 8 years old at the time. Recently, during that same cold case spotlight that Jerry Gretzinger conducted last April, he was also able to interview Ashley Ackernecht, who is now 21 years old. Take a listen to a clip from that interview.
So, we started before, and I'll kind of tailor my questions now to what we'd already started talking about. But 13 years ago, tell me, how old were you, and how did you first find out about what had happened?
Yeah, so at the time I was 8. My 9th birthday was a couple weeks away. I was laying in bed, and I just remember waking up, and there was a cop and my grandfather in my room, and I remember like a cop shining a flashlight all over the place, and I was like, what's going on? And my grandpa had said that the smoke alarm went off, so they were just checking stuff out, and I was 8, so I didn't really understand. I was like, whatever, just go back to sleep for a little while. And I still heard stuff, and I woke up again, and I remember my dad was searching through a filing cabinet, and I had asked him where my mom was because she wasn't home, and he said that she stayed late at work because apparently there was like a big boss coming in the next couple days, so helping out with that or something. So I did not know anything. I did not find out until the afternoon of October 1st.
Looking at, again, the last 13 years, we talked a little bit before about your dad. And when you were 8, you had mom, you had dad, and now it seems like the way the last 13 years have played out, whether it's because of what happened with mom or otherwise, you don't have dad in your life either at this point. Tell me about that.
It's very... when something like that happens, it stresses a family out, and something like that can either bring a family closer together or tear them apart. And I don't speak to my dad anymore. I'm not saying that I think he has something to do with my mom's disappearance, but that's just from personal, wants. I just would rather not speak to him. Um, Things happened in my childhood, like, recent, like after my mom had disappeared, and he started becoming more, combative and not wanting, my grandparents to take care of me. And I had an order of protection put against him at one time because I was afraid he would try to harm me.
You're not saying your dad had something to do with your mom's disappearance. Are you convinced he did not have something to do with her disappearance?
I'm convinced that if he did, he didn't do it by himself.
Ashley definitely seems like a well-spoken young woman who tragically didn't have her mother growing up, and from the sound of it, had a very tumultuous relationship with her dad. Another interesting thing that would happen in October of 2009, 1 year after Kellisue's disappearance, the family was holding a candlelight vigil for Kellisue when a man approached them, and he had quite a tale to tell. He said that he knew through someone else that Kellisue had run away that night to get away from her husband. He claimed that someone approached Kellisue at work saying that they knew about her problems and they had a way out for her. This man gave her directions and a key to an abandoned camp that she could hide out at for a while. The instructions were that she would have to park and abandon her car after work in the middle of the night, then walk the trails to find her way to this abandoned camp. While the story does sound a little far-fetched, or maybe even a little too much like a bad horror movie, the family did wonder if there might be some truth to it. The man they spoke to did identify himself, but he had quickly left afterwards and they had been unable to reach him for further details. But what really made them wonder is that shortly after Kellisue had disappeared, there was this small town that there were some alleged sightings of Kellisue, and this town bordered this supposed abandoned camp. Was that just another weird coincidence in this story full of coincidences? When the sightings had come in, they were investigated, according to law enforcement, but they found no sign of Kellisue. They also allegedly checked out this camp or the area where the camp was, but also found nothing. One other fact that came up is the location of the car when it was on fire was a place known as Frog Hollow. I couldn't find much out specifically about that area of town. So I'm curious if you are from that area, what is the story of Frog Hollow? It just seems such an ominous name. But this was the name of the area given where the car was found, and it was just a few blocks from Kellisue and Jason's home, and just a few doors down from where the car was found lived an uncle of Jason's. Now, I guess when families live in small towns, that probably doesn't mean anything. I just thought to mention it since it was so close to the car fire. And several people have said if Jason did do something, he couldn't have done it alone. Interesting. So let's take a look at the main theories talked about in Kellisue's case. Theory number 1. Kellisue ran off with someone that she was having an affair with, possibly this coworker at Rite. But as I mentioned, this person has not been identified. Even many years later, Jason says he doesn't know who it was, but certainly Rite Aid knows. Maybe she was fearful of Jason and she had to get out. She had to get away from him. Perhaps there is some truth to the story that the man told the family at the candlelight vigil, but as such a devoted mother, would she ever leave her young daughter behind? And if she did, she likely didn't fear that Ashley was in any danger, or she wouldn't have left her. I can't believe that she would have left Ashley based on what we know about Kellisue. Unless she was planning on coming back for her or sending for her somehow. Maybe that was the plan, it just didn't work out as it was supposed to. Theory number 2. Kellisue had car trouble that night and someone stopped by to help her. Someone that either abducted her or harmed her. We do know that the car was having problems. But if this is the case, they definitely took her out of the area as no sign of her has ever been found. And then we have to wonder, was it someone that she possibly knew? Maybe this person she was having the affair with, if she indeed was, did something. Lord knows we've seen that happen before in cases of cheating spouses. The trouble I have with a stranger is we're talking about a small town in the middle of the night. Was this a crime of opportunity? Someone just happened to be driving by this little residential area of upstate New York? And also, regarding her car trouble, if it broke down and she did indeed leave it there, did that happen right after work? Remember, she left Rite Aid at 9:30 p.m., so the breakdown would have happened between 9:30 and 10 at night. So that means that the car sat there for a few hours before the fire was reported. Did she perhaps leave work and go somewhere else first, and then was on her way home when something happened to the car? But no one has come forward to say if Kelly was with them that night or if they saw her anywhere. The car trouble story is interesting, and it's interesting that law enforcement believes that also. They don't think the car fire was arson. So maybe there is something to this theory. Theory number 3. Jason had something to do with Kellisue's disappearance. I mean, he's never been officially named a suspect. But in addition to the spouse always being looked at guiltily in cases like these, Jason had some odd behavior too. Why was he going through a filing cabinet the night that Kellisue disappeared? And he told some people at the school shortly after Kellisue vanished that he hoped they didn't find her now because he had a girlfriend. Like, what does that even matter? If they did find her, he could certainly keep his girlfriend. He told someone shortly after that he needed to find a new mom for Ashley. That leads me to believe that he didn't think Kellisue was coming back. Ashley has also admitted that he had violent tendencies, and she herself even had a restraining order against him at one point. Also, Jason seems to be the only one with knowledge of this Rite Aid affair. Jason was also a firefighter and had connections in the town. And of course, knowledge of setting fires and how fires burn. And then there's the fact that Jason's uncle lived just a couple doors down from where the car was found. Now, none of these factors, of course, make Jason guilty of something or anything, but it sure is curious. And it's tragically sad that here we are, just over 13 years later, with no answers and no clues. And a young woman who still has no idea what happened to her mom that night back in September of 2008, when she herself was just 8 years old. The media has had some mild interest in this case over the years. A big shout out to Jerry Gretzinger for conducting the interviews, which originally aired on WNYT News Channel 13 in New York. There hasn't been much coverage of the case, and certainly we hear very little, if at all, from Jason Ackernecht. It's maddening to know that if something did happen to Kellisue, If someone did do something to her, that person is still walking free today. Clearly, someone who needs to be behind bars before they hurt someone else. Or let's even hope that they haven't hurt someone else in these 13 years that have already gone by. Law enforcement seems to chalk it up to a case of a mom who needed to start over. So while they do get occasional leads in Kellisue's case, I wonder how active they are continuing their investigation for answers. I do think the answers are out there, perhaps with someone who even lives in Frog Hollow and might have seen something or might know something. Kellisue Ackernecht was last seen on September 30th, 2008. She was 35 years old and would today be 49 years old. She is described as a Caucasian female, 5 foot 10 inches tall, and weighing around 135 pounds at the time she disappeared. She has brown hair and brown eyes. She usually wears eyeglasses, and at the time she had tan frames. She was also last known to be wearing a black shirt, tan slacks, a Rite Aid apron, new pink and white sneakers, earrings, and 2 necklaces with 3 diamonds on each. She also had a wedding band on her left hand. If you have any information on the whereabouts of Kellisue Ackernecht, please contact the Johnstown Police Department at 518-736-4020. And a big thank you for listening to Kellisue's story today. A story that needs talked about more, much more. If you are interested in supporting our show further, please consider joining us over on Patreon. Our detective group there starts at just $3 a month. We will bring you some extra content and perks, and it helps us with our donations to our monthly charity partners. And of course, a huge thank you to our sponsors for supporting our mission as well. I encourage you to check out both Movement and Meals and Hydronique Hydration for your daily health and wellness needs. Links will be posted for you in the notes and over on social. Please share Kellisue's story any way that you can. Her daughter deserves some answers, and it's been way too long. Someone knows something. We will be back again next week with another Unsolved Missing Person episode, and until then, stay safe and hug your loved ones.